For more on the fight for the Republican nomination and the appointment of a special counsel in the investigation of the president's son, we turn to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for The Washington Post. Welcome to you both. Good to see you.
Good to be with you.
Let's pick up where Lisa left off there. Just want to get your reaction, Jonathan. Her reporting, and specifically this idea, the people she's talking to in Iowa, the two names she's hearing more often than others, Doug Burgum and Tim Scott. What does that say to you?
Well, before I answer your question, I want to start off the evening by saying happy birthday, David.
Happy birthday, David.
Wow.
Now back to
World historical events.
now to the question at hand. I think it gets to something that Lisa said in her report, which is when she talked to people about Donald Trump, they don't like the drama. You don't get any drama with Senator Tim Scott or with Governor Burgum. There are a lot of people who are finding out that he's actually the governor of North Dakota and that he's a real person. And I think that, if anything, I'll be watching to see how well they do as the state fair goes on and as we start focusing in on Iowa, because I do think, I hope, this is what I hope, that the Republican Party and the party faithful will gravitate to leave the drama behind. Fine, stick with the conservatives, but a conservative who actually cares about American democracy and the foundations of our democracy. That's what I would like to see, and it seems to me right now that Senator Tim Scott and Governor Burgum are those two people.
Is Iowa the place where one of the other candidates could break through?
It should be. I mean, covering Iowa and covering the state fair used to be one of my favorite things to do in politics. I was there. I saw, I think it was 1999, The Last Supper carved out of butter. Big life-size statue.
That stuck with you, didn't
I think
it?
Gary Bauer, who was a presidential candidate, I saw him tour it or something. So what was fantastic about Iowa, and maybe still is for all candidates but one, is that it really is small. You're in small groups, you're in living rooms, you're around 8, 10 people. I think this year it may not be like that. I think Trump may just be too big. He's barely been to the state. He's polling super well in the state. And he may just decide, I'm not going to debate, I'm not going to do anything, I'm just going to win.
Yeah.
And so it may be we don't get to experience the Iowa experience because Trump is just going to Bigfoot it.
We talk a lot about Iowa because they're first, obviously, but do we put too much stock in Iowa? I mean, they picked Ted Cruz in 2016, Rick Santorum in 2012, Mike Huckabee in 2008.
Their track record on the Republican side isn't very good, and you would think that Republicans would look at, maybe we should shake things up the way the Democrats did. However, Iowa looks more like the Republican Party than Iowa looks like the Democratic Party. And so that's why I think you see the shifts that are happening within the Democratic Party to shunt Iowa aside and no conversation at all about doing the same for Iowa.
What do you make of that?
And, Pat Robertson won the Iowa caucus many years ago, but Barack Obama did too.
Yeah.
And so if you're a candidate who's back in the field or people don't really know you, and then suddenly you do really well in Iowa, which you can do it with relatively little amount of money, and then you zoom up, then that makes you. And there is a possibility, I'm skeptical it'll happen, but if one of the non-Trump candidates zooms up, that would be earth-shaking, and that would make Iowa put it right back on the center of the map.
I want to ask you about the breaking news we were covering earlier today about Attorney General Merrick Garland's decision to appoint a special counsel into the investigation into Hunter Biden. That is David Weiss, who's already been investigating him, leading the investigation for the last few years, now elevated to that role. Jonathan, the White House has been referring all questions related to this to both the Department of Justice and to Hunter Biden's personal attorneys. This is clearly going to continue to be a political issue for Republicans. Could it be a political problem for the president?
I mean, it could be. Anything is possible, but I do think that the White House is doing the right thing. You've got questions about Hunter Biden? Don't ask us. Go to the Justice Department. Go to Hunter's lawyers. The president is making it, and the administration, I believe, is making it very clear, we are not interfering in this. Mm-hmm. We have nothing to do with this. And in fact, if the Attorney General wants to appoint a special counsel to investigate the president's son, well, so be it. And I was struck by something also in Lisa's reporting where she said, folks there are like, well, it's about time. Why hasn't this happened?
Yeah.
And you know why they're thinking that way? Because they've been fed a steady diet, anti-Hunter Biden, anti-Biden family diet for months, if not years, and trying to equate what's happening with the president's son to what's happening with the former president of the United States, who now has 3 indictments against him for very serious crimes, two of them, and maybe another one coming next week. So they're not equivalent, but when you get that steady diet of anti-Hunter Biden news from a particular cable network, I get why they think, what took them so long.
Well, David, this is why it's worth looking at the Republican response to that appointment today. We saw former President Trump has already issued a statement questioning the independence of David Weiss. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy also tweeted that House Republicans will not only continue their own investigations and their own probes into Hunter Biden, but he also added this: if Weiss negotiated the sweetheart deal that couldn't get approved, how can he be trusted as a special counsel? It's worth pointing out Weiss was appointed by former President Trump. He was confirmed by a Republican-led Senate. Why so much mistrust? Why this message from Republicans?
Well, the Republicans are mistrustful of, you can imagine from their point of view, it's political administration, trying to defend the son of the president. I mean, that story sort of tells itself. I guess a couple things about this position. First, it can't be good news for the White House, because a couple weeks ago it seemed like this thing was all going to peter out in a deal. And now apparently the investigation is going to go on for some significant amount of time, or else they wouldn't have done this. Mm-hmm. So that means the story still lives. The second thing is that, in the plea deal, it was about gun charges and tax charges.
Right.
Those don't seem like the big deal here. The big deal is Hunter Biden made a lot of money telling people he was going to peddle influence. Did he peddle influence? And that seems to me the core question that I would like to see somebody answer. And reporters have gone into this, and they have found he received money. They haven't found any evidence that he's peddled influence, but I think that's what I'd like to see investigated.
I want to ask you both, too, about your takeaways from a big special election that I don't know if many people expected it would be as big as it was in Ohio this week. During the summer, in a non-election year, hundreds of thousands of people turned out because abortion rights were ostensibly on the ballot. Ohioans voted not to allow a threshold change that would have made it harder to enshrine abortion rights later in November in the state constitution. Jonathan, what does that turnout and this result say to you?
It says that people are still angry. A year ago, we were talking about the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade, and then Kansas voted. Kansas was the Ohio of 2022, where folks were like, whoa, Ruby Red Kansas did this thing that protected abortion rights. Then came Kentucky, then came Montana. Now is Ohio, a state that Donald Trump won by 8 points in the last presidential election. What that tells me is that people are really angry and they're concerned about Republicans taking the overturning of Roe and then in various states and jurisdictions turning that, like doing bans on steroids to the point where Florida has a 6-week abortion ban. There are other abortion bans that have no exceptions at all for the life of the mother, rape, or incest. And people are, and women not being able to get the reproductive health care or just plain health care that they need, and left up to a board, and we're reading stories about people being disabled or losing their lives as a result of this. People are reading these stories. People are seeing what's happening. And again, in the midterm elections, we learned that the American people are very nuanced. They can care about inflation and high gas prices, but also erosion of their fundamental rights. And that is still the case as we saw in Ohio.
David, it's been more than a year since Roe was overturned. Is this going to continue to mobilize people into 24?
So the turnout numbers were eye-popping. I mean, just huge turnouts. So people really did care. Second, it wasn't just Democratic strongholds. I think Biden won like 5 of the counties in Ohio, and this thing passed in 20 of the, or more than 20 of the counties. So it was independent voters. And if you look at where the polling is on independent voters, they don't want a 6-week ban. They don't want any of that kind of stuff. And so what you see in state after state is the state legislature in red states, which is supposed to be broadly representative of opinion, is doing the 6-week, but opinion does not want to go there. I think 15 weeks. And so the Republicans, if they're going to look at this politically, are going to say, look, we're way out over here. And our people, even our people, are at somewhere around 15 weeks. And we've got to reconsider, I would think. But if it's a life issue for you, you're not going to consider the politics. But the political costs will be significant if they stay where they are.
And do you think Republicans have a cohesive message of some kind? Are they moving towards something?
Well, it's hard to, that they've taken a moral pro-life stand. And so then it's hard to scale it back once you've taken that moral. And if you're a person who's absolutely convinced that abortion is murder, you shouldn't take a political stance. You should go stick with your pro-life stance. But it will probably wind up politically costly.
And Jonathan, I'm sure we can expect to see this become a more and more central part of the Biden campaign, and specifically messaging from Vice President Harris as well.
Oh, absolutely. Vice President Harris has been out on the road talking about this issue since the leak of the draft of the Dobbs decision went out early in 2022. So absolutely.
We'll continue to follow it all. We're so grateful to have you both here. Happy birthday, David Brooks.
I've had so many of those. It sort of loses some of the fun when I get up to my numbers.
Happy birthday. Thank you for being here, David Brooks, Jonathan Capehart.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks.